As soon as I got back home, it felt like I had entered another world. I got out of the taxi at the right address, and from there, I could see a neglected, old house with faded paint. The garden was overgrown with weeds, and the windows had some broken glass panes. Suddenly, in an act of infinite confusion, I blinked as fast as I could, and the image blurred. My eyes caught the beautiful facade of my home and the fragrance of countless freshly trimmed flowers. I entered and greeted my mother. She responded from her study, "Welcome, dear, I'm in a session." Things returned to how they used to be, with the difference that a sense of unease gripped my chest to the extent that I decided to grab the essentials to leave for a room located 10 minutes away by car. In the midst of those four walls, something happened to me that I can't explain. It was like a withdrawal process. Previously, the days when I was selling insurance with my friend, I longed to return to my family nest, and I did so 2 weeks later. When I left the house with the intention of not returning, that desire intensified, and I acted like a drug addict who had been denied substances. I could only think of my home, my mother, the room where I grew up, or my sister taking lessons with Lucero. As best as I could, I resisted it. I confronted countless nightmares in which a female voice called to me from the street and offered to accompany me back to where I belonged, but when I refused, she transformed into a deformed, bony creature trying to drag me forcibly. Over the weeks, the restlessness subsided, and then ideas that had never occurred to me in the past started filling my mind. Why didn't we ever take Sonia to a hospital for a proper examination? I gathered the courage to speak with my mother. Upon arriving home, once again, I saw her aged and haggard, but when I blinked, she regained her beautiful appearance. I entered, and the delightful scent of freshly baked dessert greeted me. Then, my mother informed me, "Eat something, dear, I'm in a session." I promptly walked into the kitchen and found a delicious cheesecake still emitting steam. I cut a slice and, just as I was about to take a bite, it transformed before my eyes into a mass of black worms spilling onto the table. I screamed in horror and dropped the plate, which shattered on the floor, but apart from the shards, the tile remained clean, untouched by any cake, let alone a myriad of larvae. In front of me, on the table, the dessert remained intact. More and more strange things. I didn't taste a single bite of what the kitchen offered. I waited for the client to leave. This time it was a woman in her mid-30s, with fingers adorned with golden rings, immaculately styled hair, and designer clothing. She left the house entirely satisfied, as if she had just erased her problems and secured a wonderful future. In the past, I never knew what lay behind the doors where my mother set up her workspace, nor what she told the women to resolve their problems. That day, I wanted to find out. As soon as Sarah Montez left, a smile appeared on her face, and she rushed to hug me. She mentioned how happy she was to see me, but I had eyes only for the private room, from which soft moans emerged. I immediately asked about my sister's condition, and my mother told me she was as delicate as ever but maintained a stable condition for her circumstances. This was the perfect setting to lay out my intentions, suggesting we take her to a hospital for the necessary care. However, I received a resolute response: "Sonia is not going to leave this house." There were no further explanations. She returned to her study, and neither of them came out to see me off when I left. There was no doubt I had to understand what was happening, even if it was something horrible. The next day, I returned as if nothing had happened, and my mother greeted me with some suspicion, but she soon accepted it and regained her cheerful expression, especially when I told her I would be staying indefinitely. For dinner, she offered roast chicken with potatoes and green vegetables, a dish I declined, saying that I had eaten with the friend who provided me temporary accommodation as a farewell. Around 9 at night, my mother took Sonia to her room and encouraged her to get well so she could continue her lessons with Miss Ruiz. Later she headed to his. I let a couple of hours pass and got up from the bed in which I slept from the age of 10 to 18. I left my room and moved through the dark house. Nothing looked out of the ordinary, although sometimes, in between my blinks, I managed to catch a dilapidated and unstable scene. I headed towards the study and grabbed the handle hoping it would be closed, but it wasn't. I entered the nook that was always forbidden to me, and I felt disappointed. There was nothing strange about it. A huge bookcase dominated the back wall. In front of it stood a light-colored chaise lounge and a single sofa where my mother sat. Two glass-doored shelves held various jars and herbs similar to those used for making tea. Next to the only window, I saw a single bed with a blue star blanket and various stuffed animals. That was where my sister had to spend her time while the consultations were taking place. After taking a closer look, I noticed that the top of the bookcase was adorned with various figures made of ceramic, clay, and other materials. I arranged a couple of them and placed a tiny black cube in the middle, which would go unnoticed unless someone cleaned the furniture, which wouldn't happen anytime soon, because the shelves were devoid of the slightest presence of dust. I hurried and did not wait for dawn. I returned to the place where I rented and turned on the computer to which the camera was linked, that is, the discrete square located between the decorations of the studio in which my mother claimed to work. Since nothing happened the rest of the night, I dozed off and let the activities I so longed to observe begin. At 9 in the morning, the door opened and my family entered. Mrs. Sarah looked splendid, but Sonia walked dragging her feet. She went straight to bed and curled up in a ball. Half an hour later, the doorbell rang. My mother left the room and returned with a young, tall woman with long curly hair and a haughty demeanor. Mother asked her how she could help her, and the visitor, who said her name was Minerva, began to tell her that in her childhood she endured a lot of poverty. As soon as she turned 12, her father began to market her. He gave her precious treasure to a disgusting old man, and for that she received a few pesos, enough to eat for 2 days, and buy him a tiny dress, her new work uniform. Around the age of 16, after being sold for a time to a filthy overseer who beat her with the justification that he would thus obtain enjoyment from her, she determined that she wanted another life. It was the last time she rode a mail and also the last time she saw her father. She took advantage of every opportunity to steal money from her clients, and with that she collected enough to buy a ticket that would take her to the city. There she began working as a maid in the house of a well-off widower, whose loneliness led him to fall in love with her as a teenager. Although an age difference of around 50 years was not important to her, the girl did set conditions. To begin with, she made it clear that she would not accept anything unless there was a marriage involved, which, at the moment, was impossible, because he was months away from turning 17. The client's agreement was easy. She would accept her courtship, but her master would not be able to touch her until they were married, in a year and 3 months, during which time she would celebrate her 18th birthday. The widower, who lived in a house alone, since her children were already older and independent, filled it with gifts and details. He took advantage of the time to turn her into a lady. With makeup, high shoes, premium extensions, and designer clothes, no one would have guessed that she was almost a child. It turned out that, when the agreed-upon period had passed, a beautiful ceremony was held in which Minerva looked like a true queen. However, her stroke of luck ended on the honeymoon. Her husband had trouble consummating their marriage, so the wait was in vain, as not even the pills could help him. Nevertheless, as his lawful wife, she took care of him as lovingly as she could. But she needed to live her life, and she couldn't share it with an elderly man. That's why she visited Sarah Montes, so her gifts could help with her problem. Divorce was not an option. She wanted him to die as soon as possible and leave everything in her name. When the woman finished speaking, my mother smiled and made a calm gesture with her hand. Her lips moved to say, "I can do it, but it will cost you quite a bit." The client smiled and said that it would be nothing compared to her husband's fortune. Immediately, Sarah went to the shelf of jars, and, to my surprise, the doors displayed a false image. She opened it to reveal a closet with various containers, each with very different appearances. I saw liquids resembling blood, bottles with animals, and, though I wasn't sure, I thought I spotted some tiny things that couldn't possibly exist, preserved in glass jars. The woman who gave me life suddenly behaved like a stranger, but her actions were confident and precise. She took various liquids and combined them in a bottle with a dropper, which she handed to the woman. She explained, 10 drops a day, no more, or you'll make him disappear too quickly, and it will be suspicious. In a month, you'll become the most coveted widow in your area and also the richest. Minerva took the potion and stored it in her expensive purse, from which she pulled out a thick stack of bills. Apparently, the amount was sufficient, as my mother took it with a euphoric grin and dismissed her client. During the entire time, Sonia remained asleep and completely unaware. About 30 minutes passed, and the doorbell rang again. Two people entered the study, a woman around 50 and a girl in her mid-20s. The woman looked haggard, with cracked lips and huge dark circles. When she sat down on the couch, she slouched as if she had no strength to sit upright. Sarah didn't even have to listen to the visitor's story, as she declared, "Your mother is being eliminated." The young girl covered her face and pleaded for help, assuring that she could pay whatever was necessary. She took her wallet and placed a blank check on the table, which I assumed to be a blank check. My mother set it aside and opened the false shelf again, taking out herbs and a couple of eggs. Without wasting any time, she began passing the bundles of herbs over the woman's body. Through the lens, I noticed the plants turning black. Seeing this, Sarah took another bundle of herbs and repeated the process while saying, "The work is strong, but my spirits are even stronger." She then chanted in a strange language that I didn't recognize. After using several bundles of herbs and confirming that the last one didn't turn black, she took an egg and performed the same ritual. Then she broke it into a glass container and covered her nose. "Your mother is going to live, but you'll have to come 2 or 3 more times. We need to perform certain procedures to free her from the curses," she told the girl. She nodded without objection. The woman, who had looked unwell, got up on her own, although she seemed dazed and had a better appearance. As soon as they left the study and the front door lock was heard, my mother lifted the plate with the eggs and approached the window. With the daylight coming in, the camera captured a dark, frothy liquid, as if the eggs had been rotten. She took a small spoon from her shelf and stirred the substance. She then went over to my sister, woke her up, and said, "My girl, you have to drink this, sweetheart, I need your help." Sonia initially refused, claiming that these concoctions always made her nauseous and caused stomach pain, but my mother promised to call Lucero to visit and teach her some math. That convinced her, and she ingested every last drop, writhing on the bed and screaming in despair. Several kilometers away, I clenched my fists in anger and saved the video. Without caring about anything else, I went to my mother's house and stormed in like a hurricane. I arrived when there were no clients, so I found Sarah in the kitchen and yelled that I would take Sonia with me right away. She refused and called me a fool, but when I shoved my cell phone in her face, showing the video of how she forced Sonia to drink her concoctions, she fell silent. I turned around to look for my little sister, but my mother stopped me and swore she would explain things to me. I heard a repugnant confession. She referred to herself as a guardian, but she insisted that the more common term for someone like her was a witch. So, without hesitation, she revealed herself as a witch and emphatically stated, "There are no one-size-fits-all witches. Some are ancestral, changing their bodies at will or becoming spheres of fire that dance at night to invoke favors from light or shadow. There are also learned witches, abundant in Haiti and known to me in Veracruz. They dance, pray, or prepare complex rituals to call upon unimaginable beings, offering their energies and even a life to fulfill their desires or those of others. Of course, there are natural witches, those born with special and inexplicable gifts, and our family has a long list of such witches. Your grandmother and my great-grandmother were among them. And now, I am one." I found it infuriating to listen to this string of nonsense, but I told her that it was fine. If she believed in it, she was free to continue with her witchcraft. However, I would take my sister with me right away. I finally understood why she got so sick. My mother looked at me in horror and told me that I couldn't do that because she needed her. It was horrifying to know that her delusions involved an innocent being, her own daughter. I imagine she deduced my thoughts, so she explained her reasons. Every Montez witch has had a mandate since time immemorial. She must marry someone from her lineage and instruct her firstborn child in the occult art, just as she should have been educated in her youth. When I married your father, a distant cousin who was the second among his siblings, I got pregnant and lost the baby before the first trimester. My legacy was completely nullified. A Montez witch's second son has no trace of virtue. I looked for it in you day and night, but the rules were upheld. If a Montez witch has a third son, he can learn the teachings but never master them. On the other hand, if a girl is born, she is a marvelous vessel in which evil can be cleansed, and we must use her as a divine gift. Carlos, my son, Your sister helps others heal. She drinks the things that wicked people impose on them, and her body takes care of their healing. Sonia receives spells, curses, spirits, and demons that afflict others and then purifies them. As she grows, her virtue increases, and I can attend to people in worse conditions. They pay whatever I ask. I might have been able to understand the first part of her argument, but the last sentences she uttered disgusted me entirely. My mother believed herself to be a witch and was blinded by a sickening greed, using her daughter to carry out her supposed duties. What kind of mother is capable of that? Even if it was a true story, what mother would sacrifice her child like that? Did she use the money she collected? It seemed to me that she was only gathering it to feel powerful. I had many questions and theories. I felt sorry for my mother, but she also frightened me. I was uncertain about what she would do, and I wished to be rescued from that nightmare. I didn't see where it came from, but she suddenly handed me a cup of coffee and invited me to drink it to calm down. I told her no and swiped the cups off the table. I saw them fly, but I didn't hear the sound of the ceramic breaking. As I looked at the table, the cup and saucer were intact. I got up with teary eyes, went for Sonia, and took her in my arms. The girl had a fever and a chilling pallor, along with a slight layer of foam around her lips. My sister was being poisoned. I walked to the door, but Sarah Montez was there, and she raised her hand as if she was going to slap me. She didn't hit me, but my mind visualized a scene. In it, I took Sonia out of the house, brought her to a hospital, and they attended to her quickly. The tests revealed terrible diseases, causing them to fill her with tubes. I saw her arms covered in bruises from the IVs they applied, as well as a tube coming out of her throat to help her breathe. I watched her writhing from the convulsions she would experience far from the house and sensed the indifference the specialists would display, as they would believe from the very beginning that my sister had no chance of survival. Over time, her condition would deteriorate, and she would develop bed sores, those sores that emerge from prolonged immobility. My eyes shed thick tears, but my father opened the door to the room where Sonia was suffering and looked at me directly. "None of this is real, my son. Take her away." I heard his words as clearly as if he had spoken them next to me, and that brought me out of the trance. Before my eyes appeared an old woman with battered skin and gray hair. She looked over 70. She was wearing the same dress as my mother, and her eyes were identical. However, her body looked very different. She was hunched over, and her sagging breasts swung as she breathed. She yelled at me that I couldn't take the child and revealed a mouthful of cavities. Maybe she wanted to scare me, but that only repulsed me. I pushed her to clear her out of my way and left hastily. I crossed the garden, feeling invisible hands tugging at my clothes to prevent me from getting away, but I managed to overcome them. I hurriedly crossed the street. A taxi appeared on the avenue, and I hailed it. As it approached, I looked back and saw my mother, as beautiful as ever, leaning against the front door. "From there," she said, "my child, as strong as your father, but incapable of winning, I will find you no matter where you go. When you hear a frog sing, that will be me. If you're wondering, it's been almost 8 months. Terrible things didn't happen to Sonia when I took her away from our mother. On the contrary, the lab tests detected some bacteria that disappeared with the right medicines. She gradually regained her health, and her once pale skin turned into a lovely blush, ideal for a 7-year-old. Although it hasn't been easy to take care of her, seeing her happy is a tremendous relief. She didn't comprehend what happened, so she doesn't have any traumas, just a few doubts. I know I'm only 19, but I'm still selling insurance, and things are going well. With that, we managed to pay for her school, where she's proven to be brilliant, earning the highest grades in the institute. At first, I thought a social worker would come to take my sister back and return her to Sarah Montez, but nothing of the sort happened. Nobody ever looked for us, not even my mother. Maybe she can't leave the house, who knows? Nonetheless, I decided that we would move away and put more distance between that woman and us. This was especially because one afternoon, we started hearing a frog croaking, and each night, it sounded closer and closer. I immediately remembered my mother's threat, and although I still harbor some skepticism, I know I experienced things that were too strange, and I prefer not to take any risks. We haven't confirmed it yet, but I have no doubt that sooner or later, the frog will be heard no matter where we are, on the 10th floor, in an extremely warm place, or near the beach. I can't lie, it scares me. Sometimes, I have horrible dreams, but then I look at Sonia, and I'm filled with immense strength. I'm going to fight against whatever comes and win, even if things seem impossible, because a brother's love is stronger than any evil, even that represented by a witch or a disturbed mother. My mother is a witch. Story written for Dark Secret by A.R. Garcia.